And hello again, boys and girls. Welcome back to the channel. It's of course your host Marley Startled. So this is just a bit of a recap of the sort of part two of the experimental entrenchment build. So as you can see, well, as we did before in France, we attempted it, and of course we found some rather glaring issues. The fact being that you just didn't have enough resources, too high risk, low reward, and as one of the commenters pointed out, with trains or siege trains, you can reduce entrenchment even further. So the big issues were, of course, if the Germans got air superiority, then it would lower your entrenchment, and if they had the guns or the what do you call it, railway guns, you would also get lower entrenchment, sort of invalidating the entrenchment. So taking that logic forward, we needed to pick a nation where we'd normally have air superiority on the front we were fighting on, as well as a reduced likelihood of railway guns, because of course most games in the Eastern Front tends to be more mobile. So using the advanced AI, or what do you call it, expert AI, I decided to do a bit of a Bulgaria run, this time trying to once again maximize that entrenchment and see how far we get. So this was a late build, so effectively I did not join the war in 1938 or 39, and only really joined the war with the collapse of Greece. For the most part, most of my industry was going into building civs until late 38, and then most of it was mill building and waiting. In the end, this led to this sort of tank design, which is a bit more, how do I put it, a bit more classier than the cheapies. And that's why I've got a reduced number of divisions. Where you can see we went for the advanced high velocity gun. That was really one of the main reasons I couldn't produce earlier, because I didn't have that speed research bonus. The fixed structure, the basic radio, the dozer blades, the squeeze bore adapter, and machine gun to increase the soft attack. You can see we go fairly slow, and we have some fairly okay armor. Now we could of course upgrade our armor, but I made a decision to stop upgrading armor to maintain my production cost. On the left, you have got the engine gasoline type for that max speed fuel usage, that riveted armor for that minus 20% production cost, and a torsion bar for the 10% reliability. This is going off the 1936 tech, simply because I didn't have enough time to research 1941 tech. I just did not have enough research slots. This culminated in this sort of division, where we have a 30 whip, org 30, engineering, support artillery, and logistics company, with an entrenchment of 16 and several motorized. You can see it's sort of basic hardness of 50, and it has an extremely high hard attack of 400, which is pretty good for a light tank, and has a breakthrough of 39. Soft attack is acceptable with that 16 entrenchment and the 126 piercing, which I'd hope would pierce most tanks, especially if they're going for that sort of 20 whip or 30 whip design. The only issue really was the speed and the cost, but altogether I was still able to get 6 divisions out by by the start of Barb. Now, if we take a look over here, my research is pretty standard. Of course, we've rushed the old standard build. If you've seen my build for Bulgaria, pretty much the same. 2 research slots at the start for construction and industry, followed by a switch at a later date, around about the 39 mark. And over here we've got our second research for entrenchment, our upgraded research for logistics to reduce the fuel consumption, and a hard research all the way down to anti-tank, which we stopped researching there, so we needed to research for the basic high velocity cannon. See, we've only researched the basics for for the radio, and apart from that, we've had to limit everything else because we simply don't have enough research to continue on, or enough research slots, or enough time to do it. So this eventually culminated in that 6 divisions here. In terms of bonuses for my generals, I went with the defensive doctrine for that plus 30% entrenchment, and I went for this fellow here, where he has the combined arms expert for motorized defense. Unfortunately, he's got a cavalry leader for that motorized attack as well. Now, hopefully, that should be a pretty acceptable division. You can see here that we can get up to 36% maximum entrenchment, but of course it's not going to be particularly useful for offensive techniques. Now, unfortunately, I can't really test this on the same way I tested France, because I doubt the Soviets will have any particularly good tanks. Let's take a check. FOW. We've got one light tank yet. I'm not going to be able to test this the same way, unfortunately, but hey ho, it is what it is. Anyway, we'll see how well these perform against Expert AI at the very least, and we'll go from there. Okay, gentlemen, the war has started. Now let's take a look at what sort of damage we can do. So if we take a look at the FOW again, the war started a bit late. So this is infantry template 5. So if we tag Soviets, so if we take a look at infantry template 5, they have got 1 anti-air, 21 combat width, soft attack coming to 32, hard attack 42. They have got pretty much all supply companies and anti-tank and a maintenance company, so they can have a piercing of 52. This is not really something you'd normally come against in most games, if I'm honest with you, but it's a pretty strong all-rounder unit. So if we now tag switch back to our other tanks, so that's probably going to be better than most Russian infantry, if I'm honest, in most multiplayer games. Take a look. Let's take a look at our stats. We have an armor of 18, so they will pierce. We have a breakthrough of 150. We have more soft attack and more hard attack, so we'll see how well that works for us. Of course, we have an entrenchment of 30. Sadly, my guys have not joined the war because I didn't join in time. I joined that battle. The Bulgarian tanks are in. No fuel, but that's to be expected. Now they're attacking this. What's my defense? 367. No air superiority, which is amusing. He's not doing badly. They are piercing us and we are running out of fuel, but that's to be expected. But if it does get pushed back, it runs a big old risk of being overrun. But these tanks aren't fully supplied, so I'm not sure how effective they would be in a battle normally. But take a look at the tanks. So normally it's supposed to be heavy tanks. We have an armor of 82, a piercing of 71 with 292 hard attack and 633 soft attack. So they're really infantry killers. Take a look at their tank production. The KV-1A, so that's a bit behind, I think. KV-1s are pretty behind. Oh no, it's a 1940 heavy, but still not the best. Mostly machine guns, improved medium cannon, welded armor, diesel engine. Okay. Not the most optimum tanks, but I'm not going to complain too much because they're still acceptable against, say, a mediocre or medium player. But then again, these are half supplied, so probably want to bear that in mind. How many tanks of these have I killed? I've lost 500 light tank destroyers. I destroyed one heavy tank apparently. Only one heavy tank. Ugh. I guess there's not a lot of heavy tanks in their actual tank designs. Like, yeah, when that's down, they dig in. So when the ore is low, they're not starving. or they're not easy to push back as long as they don't get immediately counterattacked. This feels like a more comfortable defense, if you know what I mean. Like, you don't have to micro as much. Because when your augur's low, they're immediately entrenching anyway, so it's not the end of the world. So hopefully the entrenchment counteracts if you're not paying attention. What I would say about this is that it's a bit of an oil hog, so you may have to bear that in mind when doing this. Hopefully you've got a good Romania or the Germany player's not going to be too much of a hogger of the oil, but of course, yeah, resources go to Germany first, so you've got to bear that in mind. I mean, this sort of stuck here. They're pushing me, but I can't. This just needs infantry support. That's all this needs. As long as this has got infantry support, this is pretty useful. But without infantry support, it's just not going to be able to push anything. And it's going to push things slowly, especially infantry. Looks garbage without infantry support. No infantry support, it just does nothing. Which is a problem, which is actually really a big problem. Because then you'll be expecting the Germany AI or Germany player to assist you in that, which isn't probably going to happen if I'm honest with you. It's not bad, but it's just it's a big limiting factor on this is it can't push by itself. It needs some more adequate infantry to help assist the push, and then of course if enemy tanks come, then they can fight them off. But it's not an individual infantry killer, which is a shame. Right, let's see if we can. So we've more or less demonstrated the offensive capability. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to break through now. Because the Soviet AI is ridiculously good in terms of roach build and the German AI is collapsing. And of course Bulgaria can't carry by themselves unless of course it's a meme game. So what that means is we will have to switch and deviate to defensive playstyle. So this is what we're doing, defensive playstyle now. The war's over, we're going to end siege mode now. Let's see how long this lasts for us. Okay, here's a good example, boys. So it's the 26th of October. I've just played defensively. I've got 17 divisions out. I've upgraded my tank, so my tank production is in the poo-poo right now, but it shouldn't be the end of the world. So here's a good example of what I'm talking about. Let's turn this off. So you can see here I'm being heavily pushed by the infantry, but there's a few tanks here which I attack, and they get pushed off. Tanks just get immediately pushed off, but it's the infantry that is slowing things down. Now I suppose we could change the design, maybe add some machine guns, something like that. Which may improve our sort of situation, but well, already we're pretty stretched thin in terms of production ability. So that's a bit of a consideration we have to make. Again, if the tank pushes, it just dies. Again, tank gets involved, gets pretty much immediately deleted. Then you have to come in and it's ogre. Okay boys, we'll call it here. So it's the 1st of January 1944. Now as you can see, expert AI, the Soviets have counterattacked, started pushing back the rest of the Allies, and I have been gradually pushed back from Kiev. So if we take a look at our end production, of course, at this stage the war would normally be lost or won really by 1942-43. This is a bit of a crapshoot, but in any case, you see our soft attack and our hard attack is pretty good, along with our organisation, our breakthrough, and our entrenchment. But of course, this is a late game. This is not really a good example of the tank itself. Of course, really, it's all about the piercing and the hard attack, which are both fairly acceptable for their scale. And so we can't complain too much about that. Now, if we take a look at our actual armored divisions, we can see we ended up with a breakthrough of 165, a pretty high hardness of 56%, and an entrenchment of 19. Now, what I would say about this build is that it's very boring first, because you spend most of the game just building up your civs and waiting for the research to kick in, as Bulgaria. So if you're doing that late build, then you're not going to have any game impact till Barbarossa, and of course, depending on what lobby you're in, Barbarossa may not occur depending on if you know the Germany player or not. It is completely dependent on infantry support. As you can see in some of the battles, my tanks were really being pushed off to withdraw. That's because they were going first into the battle and they were being beaten by the enemy infantry, which was more numerous. And of course, the German infantry could not join because their combat whip wasn't there available to them. So what does that mean? And so it means that it's completely dependent on infantry support, and of course it's still very vulnerable to breakthrough if a Soviet player does decide to coordinate with his infantry. At the same time, you only be needing to coordinate with the German infantry, and of course if they don't want to coordinate or they're too busy microing, you're just not going to be able to do that. So this sort of build is relegated to Romania, where it's a smaller front. The Romanian player is normally going to be microing with its own infantry. Sometimes the Romanian player may ask you to push with your tanks and so on and so forth, and you may be able to push that, but really it's hard to say about this build because of course it's got all the optimum setting. It's got green air, it's got no enemy railway guns, so it's all very optimum conditions, but you can't really tell about the build unless it comes across an actual multiplayer game. So I've tried desperately to find a multiplayer game to test this on, but as it stands, it seems like a very good supportive role if you've got good team coordination. If you don't, then this could just be a disaster. I would say with the end production that you do have to be careful not to go over that sort of 10 production limit, because you just won't have enough to keep on manning. So you want to stay around about 10, 11 production limits. So if that means having limited armor and limited engines, so be it. And of course it does risk overrun at its slower speed, so you are again dependent on that green air to reduce the movement. I could potentially see this as a reserve line, so you have this behind the enemy line, say behind the Brat trap here, and then once the Soviet tanks push, you counter push them back, and that stops them from memeing forward. That's the only thing I could say about it, because it kills tanks wonderfully. It's a wonderful tank killer, and it just doesn't just destroys them, just pushes them back, deorgs them before. In fact, I would argue that it's too much of a good tank killer, because it's making the tank divisions fall back before you do enough damage to them. So if we take the Sov, this bizarre concoction with an armor of 107, which again is perfectly pierce worthy. So if they were to get higher armor, if I just went full heavy tank, they still have an armor of 102. Okay, if we tried and upgraded the armor, it's just, I say hypothetically, they just went full armor. Now 137. That may prove a problem for us, so we'd have to check that. Let's go back over to our heavy tank chassis. But I doubt anyone would do that because of how slow it is, but it could potentially happen. If I tag back over. Yeah, if they went full slow tank behemoth heavy tank build, then it would be impossible to break, and we just get rolled over. But as it stands, it seems like a very useful build for the Eastern Front, because of course you're no longer really relying on the entrenchment. You're sort of relying on a combination of hard soft attack, entrenchment, and some armor just to reduce but your production is so cheap you don't really need the armor. I just feel like it's a pretty useful build with the soft attack and so on. It's useful enough to be used in a multiplayer game as Bulgaria. It's a nice difference. I think this will actually have more game impact than, say, actual rocket artillery, because rocket artillery, if motorized and mechanized rocket artillery, because it will just, once a Russian tank comes along, it just shuts down that rocket artillery, and so you're very dependent on German tank support. Whereas with this, you can sort of give the German player more breathing room to heavy micro, because you've got enough of these, you can hold a solid front and push back any big armor pushes. Of course, it is a very slow speed, but I suspect if we were to upgrade it a bit more, see, it's got a max speed of 56. We go to our previous version at a max speed of 5.4. We could potentially upgrade this some more to 5.9. But we're getting a bit too close in terms of that high production cost. So I think 5.6, 5.9 is okay. I mean, it will suffer from overrun tankers, but I think that is highly unlikely that a tank built for speed and armor under the Soviets will be numerous enough or be strong enough to counter what you're bringing to the table. What you're bringing to the table is effectively a wall and a big halt to tanks at the expense of requiring support from Romania. I feel like this is a good rat trap wall, and then of course the Hungary player and the Romania player can sort of do their thing, and you can of course be that reserve line. You may not be leading the push, but you'll be behind just about, making sure that if there is a counterattack by the Soviets, they do not counterattack through the retreating enemy, retreating troops, and overrun. It's more of a supportive role, I suspect, rather than an actual sort of micro-intensive role. And of course, the good thing about it is you can take a tile. Then, of course, if you do get dueled or pushed back, or your counterattack fails, if the enemy is not microing very well, you can just stay in that position and build up that entrenchment. I don't think there's a problem with this build. I think as long as there's air superiority, which you should get on the Eastern Front, you're going to have an okay time of it. As you can see, I did most of the main thrust into Minsk, and I did most of the main defense on the Eastern Front. Again, it's the numbers that are posing the problem, not the actual build itself. And so I think it's a good build. So I'll leave this for you one more time. So this is the end build. Of course, ignore the stats, it's 1944, but you'll be able to see the previous video. And of course, the end stats on this. So I'll show you the one which we used for Barb, which was this bad boy. Machine gun for the extra soft attack, squeeze bore for the extra piercing, of course entrenchment +1, radios for the extra breakthrough. I think this was radios 1 initially, but we upgraded it. And then of course the fixed turret for the anti-tank. Altogether, not a bad build. I don't really see anything wrong with the stats. I mean, it could be higher, you could have higher hard attack, or you could have higher soft attack, but I just don't see any issues with it for what it is. It's supposed to bleed Soviet armor, and it's supposed to retard offensives, so another micro force can come in and take over. You're buying time and you're halting, you're sort of limiting the scope of maneuver, because what tends to happen on the east is you'll push far in, the Germany will be inundated in micro, and then the Germans, Soviets counterattack when the Germans too busy being micro, and potentially Romania in the center, and then because the German players overly focused on a micro, they in somewhere else they lose a load of tanks or a load of infantry, or Romania collapses because they can't control the whole area. What this brings to the table is control. It reduces the front and means that if any Soviet attacks occur, you can slow them down enough for the Soviet player to prioritize their focuses strategically, or you can potentially just block an offensive before it happens. Altogether, I think it's a pretty good build, but it is boring as hell. It is a boring build. Anyway, boys, we'll call it here, boys. So hope you enjoyed. If you have any comments, don't hesitate. What you think of the build. I didn't bother doing the actual build up because there's no point. You've already seen my build ups and they're pretty self-explanatory. But there's only a few deviations which anyone with any iota of experience in the game will be able to understand. So thank you all for watching, boys, and I'll see you all later. Adieu.